Ava was just finishing breakfast, her small hands gently placing the last piece of toast on her plate when she heard the knock. It was quick, urgent, and loud enough to make her heart race in her chest. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her mother had already left for work, and the house was usually quiet during the day. Her parrot, Zeus, perched on the edge of the kitchen counter, squawking happily as he preened his feathers, unaware of the tension building in the air. Ava hesitated, the slice of toast halfway to her mouth. The knock came again, louder this time, demanding attention. Her stomach twisted. She wasn't good with surprises, especially when they came unannounced. The doorbell rang right after, a sharp, irritating sound that pushed her nerves even further. Who was it? She shuffled nervously to the door, gripping the handle with one hand and keeping her other hand on the railing to steady herself. Her disability made even simple tasks feel like a mountain sometimes, but she was used to the challenge. She opened the door just a crack, enough to peer out. Standing on the porch was a man in a uniform, his badge glinting in the morning light. His face was grim, his eyes cold as they locked with hers. "Good morning," he said, his voice heavy with authority. "I'm Officer Grant, and I've received a complaint about an exotic animal in the neighborhood. I need to speak with the owner." Ava's heart skipped a beat. She felt a chill run down her spine. What did he mean by exotic animal? She had a parrot, Zeus, but that was harmless. He was her emotional support animal, her constant companion through the days of loneliness and isolation. But she didn't know how to explain that to this officer who was standing in front of her, looking like a stone wall. Ava tried to steady her breath. I'm the owner, but Zeus is a parrot and he's harmless," she said, her voice shaky but firm. Officer Grant didn't seem convinced. He glanced past her, eyeing the room as if expecting to see something dangerous, something threatening. "I'm going to need you to step aside. I'll need to inspect the animal." Ava's chest tightened. The sudden request, the way his gaze hardened as he stepped closer, it felt wrong. Something wasn't right. This wasn't just a simple routine check. The officer's posture and the way he spoke told her that something more was coming. "I don't think you understand," Ava began, feeling the rush of panic creep in, but she tried to keep her voice calm. "Zeus is my emotional support animal. He's registered. He's here to help me. I've had him for years. He's not a threat to anyone." Officer Grant's lips pressed together in a thin line. He stepped closer, towering over her in a way that made Ava feel small. His eyes darted to the parrot on the counter, and the tension in his gaze sharpened. "I've been told it's a threat to the community. I'm here to take the animal with me. You can pick it up later." Ava's mind raced. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Zeus, her only companion through the darkest days, was being treated like some dangerous creature. The thought of losing him, of someone taking him away from her, made her blood run cold. "No, you can't just take him," she whispered urgently, panic flooding her voice. "He's not a threat. He's part of me. He's part of my life." But the officer wasn't listening. Before she could respond, he stepped forward and grabbed Zeus by the perch, jerking him from his place on the counter with a force that made Ava's breath catch in her throat. Zeus squawked in surprise, flapping his wings wildly, but the officer held him roughly, as if he were nothing more than an object. Ava's heart pounded, a wave of nausea rising in her throat. "Please don't hurt him," she pleaded, her voice barely audible. She tried to reach for Zeus, but the officer pushed her back, the look on his face unreadable, impassive. "This is for your own good," he said coldly. "We'll get him to a safe place." Tears welled in Ava's eyes as the officer walked away with Zeus, ignoring her desperate pleas. She felt paralyzed, unable to move, to do anything. The weight of her own helplessness settled in her chest, and the door slammed shut in her face with a finality that left her trembling. She sank to the floor, her heart still racing, her hands shaking. Her parrot, the one thing that had always been there for her, who had kept her company in a world that often ignored her, was gone. And no one seemed to care. Outside, the officer's car drove off, the sound of the engine slowly fading as Ava sat there in the quiet of her home, feeling the deafening silence creep in. The emptiness was suffocating, and it felt like the world around her was closing in. She didn't know who to turn to. The community. They wouldn't care. The system. She had no faith in it anymore. But something inside Ava burned. The rage she felt, the humiliation, the unfairness. It all boiled inside her. No one was going to take Zeus from her. No one would make her feel small anymore. She wasn't going to let this go. And so, Ava's fight began. What she didn't know then was that this moment, the loss of Zeus, would be the turning point. It would set her on a path that would shake her world to its core, forcing her to confront a system that had long ignored people like her. The next few days would be filled with phone calls, emails, and attempts to get Zeus back, but each step brought her closer to something bigger than she could have imagined. The battle wasn't just about her parrot anymore. It was about standing up against the forces that tried to break her, tried to make her feel like she didn't belong. But Ava was done being quiet. She was done being invisible. She would fight back, no matter the cost. The days that followed felt like a blur to Ava. After Officer Grant took Zeus, a deep sense of loss settled into her chest like a heavy stone. Every day since, she felt the absence of her parrot in the quiet corners of her room, the empty perch that had once held Zeus, the silence that had replaced his cheerful squawks. The loneliness that had always been a part of her life now felt deeper, more suffocating. She had fought so hard to get through each day, finding solace in the presence of her bird, but now it seemed like the world was determined to take even that away from her. Ava knew she couldn't just sit and wait for things to return to normal. She had to act, to do something. But what could she do? The officer had taken Zeus, and she had no idea where he was, or if she'd ever see him again. Every phone call to the police station had ended in frustration, with vague promises that someone would look into the matter, but nothing ever changed. She had tried explaining to the officers how important Zeus was to her, but they seemed more focused on the technicalities of the situation, ignoring her pleas. It wasn't just the loss of Zeus that stung. It was the overwhelming sense that no one was listening to her, that no one cared. Ava had felt invisible before, but this was different. This time, the system was actively working against her, and the fact that Officer Grant, a man of authority, had been the one to do this, made it even worse. His dismissal of her, his disregard for her feelings, his sheer disregard for her rights. It was all a reminder of how small she was in a world that didn't seem to value her. She sat in her room that evening, staring at the empty space where Zeus's perch had been. She ran her fingers over the fabric of the chair she sat in, a place she had spent countless hours in with her parrot beside her. She could still hear the sound of Zeus's wings flapping, the gentle murmur of his voice calling her name. Now, it was all just a memory. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text message from her best friend, Julia. Julia. Hey, are you okay? I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry. Do you need anything? Ava swallowed hard, fighting back tears. She was grateful for Julia's message, but at the same time, she felt embarrassed. She didn't want to be seen as weak, even though that's how she felt. She didn't want to burden anyone with her pain, especially not Julia, who had her own life to live. Ava, I don't know. I just feel so lost right now. They took him, Julia. Zeus is gone, and no one is listening to me. Julia's response was quick. Julia, that's messed up. I can't believe they'd do that to you. You don't deserve this. Ava sighed, looking down at her phone. She wished she could feel the comfort of her friend's words, but they didn't change anything. Zeus was still gone, and the injustice of it all weighed so heavily on her heart that it felt like it might never stop. The next day, Ava decided to do something she should have done earlier. She was tired of sitting around, letting the officers and the system make decisions for her. She needed answers, and she wasn't going to wait for anyone else to act. After breakfast, she grabbed her coat, put on her shoes, and made up her mind. She was going to go to the police station. It wasn't an easy decision, but Ava knew it was the only way she could get her voice heard. She felt a nervous knot in her stomach as she walked to the bus stop, but it was a feeling she had learned to live with. She had dealt with far worse in the past, and this wouldn't be any different. At least, that's what she told herself. When she reached the police station, she paused outside, looking up at the building. It was an imposing structure, cold and uninviting. It felt like a place where people like her, people without power, weren't meant to be. But today, Ava wasn't going to let that stop her. She needed to find out where Zeus was, and she wasn't going to leave without answers. She walked inside, her heart pounding in her chest. The lobby was quiet, sterile, almost too perfect in its order. A couple of officers sat behind a desk, typing away at computers or talking among themselves, completely uninterested in Ava. Ava approached the counter, her voice soft at first, but growing louder as she realized that if she didn't speak up, nothing would change. "Hi, I'm Ava. I need to speak to someone about my parrot, Zeus. He was taken by Officer Grant a few days ago, and I haven't been able to get any information about where he is or why he was taken." The officer behind the desk glanced up, barely acknowledging her presence. "Can you give me more information about the incident?" he asked, his tone dismissive. Ava tried to steady herself. "I've already given the information multiple times. Zeus is an emotional support animal, and Officer Grant took him without any justification. I just want to know where he is. He's very important to me." The officer didn't look up from his paperwork. "I'll make a note of it," he said flatly. "Someone will get back to you." Ava felt her stomach drop. This was the same treatment she had received over the phone, over and over again. No one cared. No one was taking her seriously. She had hoped that coming in person would make a difference, but it was clear that the system was built to ignore people like her. "Please," Ava said, her voice rising slightly. "I need to know what's happening. Why are you treating me like this? Zeus is my only companion. You can't just take him and not tell me why. He's not just a bird. He's a part of my life." The officer sighed and looked at her finally, his gaze cold. "I understand that you're upset, but you need to understand that we follow procedures. It's not personal." Ava felt her face flush with anger. "It is personal," she said sharply, her voice trembling. "I am a person. You're treating me like I don't matter. You're treating me like my disability and my race don't matter. I've been ignored my entire life, but I won't let this go." The officer's expression softened slightly, but there was no apology in his eyes. "We're doing our best to handle the situation. Please, just wait for a call. We can't give you any further information right now." Ava stood there for a moment, staring at the officer, feeling a wave of frustration wash over her. She had come in hoping for answers, but now she felt more invisible than ever. She left the station, walking back to the bus stop with the same hollow feeling in her chest that had started when Zeus was taken. But Ava wasn't giving up. She couldn't. She knew she had to fight for what was hers, for the only thing that had ever truly made her feel like she mattered. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. As Ava walked back home, her mind raced with everything that had happened. She hadn't gotten the answers she wanted, but she had learned something important. The system might try to silence her, but she would not stay quiet. She was ready to fight, not just for Zeus, but for herself, for the right to be heard, and she would keep fighting, no matter what it took. The following days felt like a never-ending whirlwind for Ava. The anger, confusion, and pain that had built up over losing Zeus were still fresh, but there was something new growing inside her, a sense of determination. It was small at first, just a spark of defiance in her chest. But with each passing day, it burned brighter. Ava had always been quiet, always tried to blend into the background, to keep a low profile. But the way Officer Grant had treated her, the way he had taken Zeus from her without any consideration for her feelings, had shaken something loose. The injustice was not something she could ignore. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how many people in her life had treated her the same way, like she didn't matter. And for once, she wasn't going to let it slide. She woke up that morning, feeling the weight of the last few days on her shoulders, but with a new resolve. Today was going to be different. She wasn't going to sit by and let the system, the world, or anyone else decide her worth for her. Ava was going to take action, even if it was small steps. She had to. Her first step was calling her friend Julia. Julia had been her rock for as long as Ava could remember. She was the only person who had never treated Ava like she was fragile or different. Julia was the one who had always stood up for Ava when the world tried to put her in a corner. Ava needed her now more than ever. The phone rang twice before Julia picked up. Ava, hey, what's up? Julia's voice was warm and familiar, and Ava immediately felt a wave of comfort wash over her. I need your help, Ava said, her voice shaky. I don't know what to do. I need to get Zeus back, but I'm not sure where to start. Julia paused for a moment. Ava could hear the rustle of papers in the background, and then her voice came back, steady and full of determination. We'll figure it out together. You don't have to do this alone. I've got your back, okay? Ava's heart softened at the reassurance. I don't know what I'm doing, Julia. I've called the police station. I've tried to talk to them, but nothing is happening. They're just ignoring me. Julia's voice became more serious. That's unacceptable. We need to escalate this. You need to get your story out there, make people listen. You've got a right to have Zeus back. I'll help you get in touch with some local groups that can advocate for you. You shouldn't have to do this by yourself. Ava felt a small smile tug at her lips. Thanks, Julia. You don't know how much this means to me. I'm always here, Ava. Always. The next day, with Julia's help, Ava reached out to an advocacy group for disabled rights. It wasn't an easy process. Navigating the bureaucracy of it all felt overwhelming. But the more she spoke about her situation, the more Ava realized how important it was to share her story. As she explained how Officer Grant had taken Zeus from her without justification, the woman on the other end of the phone was sympathetic, but also firm. You have every right to be upset, the woman said, and we will help you take the necessary steps. This isn't just about getting your parrot back. This is about making sure that no one else has to go through what you've experienced. No one should be treated this way. Ava felt a surge of gratitude. For the first time in days, she felt like someone was truly listening to her. She wasn't just a voice lost in the crowd anymore. Her story mattered. Later that week, Ava received a call from a reporter who had heard about her situation through the advocacy group. The news outlet had been covering similar cases where disabled individuals and marginalized communities had faced mistreatment, and Ava's story had caught their attention. Hi, Ava, the reporter said. I'm with the City News. We'd love to hear more about your story. We think it's important that people know what happened to you. Ava hesitated for a moment, but then she realized this could be the chance she needed to make a difference, to make people see her, not just as a black disabled girl, but as a person who deserved to be heard, to be treated with dignity. Okay, Ava said, her voice steady now. I'll talk to you. The interview lasted almost an hour, but it felt like time stood still as Ava shared the details of what had happened with Officer Grant, how she had been treated as if her concerns didn't matter, how Zeus had been ripped away from her in an act of cruelty. The reporter was kind, asking follow-up questions with genuine interest, and by the end of the conversation, Ava felt a sense of relief. She had finally said her piece, and she knew that now, the story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who had been treated unfairly, everyone who had been silenced. The next morning, the story ran on the front page of the City News. Ava could hardly believe it. She was in the public eye now, and with that came a mix of fear and exhilaration. People were talking about her, her story, her fight for justice. Some of the comments were supportive, but others were filled with judgment and ignorance. They called her weak, too emotional, or even claimed she was just looking for attention. But through all the negativity, there was something else, something that Ava hadn't expected. People were speaking out in her defense. Strangers, activists, and community members were reaching out, offering their support, and more importantly, demanding justice for Ava and her parrot. One afternoon, Ava received another call. This time, it was from the police station. It was the same officer she had spoken with days earlier, the one who had dismissed her concerns and told her to wait for a call. His tone was apologetic, but still professional. We've reviewed the situation, Officer Thompson said. We've decided to return Zeus to you, Ms. Harper. We are deeply sorry for the way this was handled. Officer Grant has been reassigned, and we are looking into further actions. Please come to the station tomorrow to pick him up. Ava couldn't believe it. It wasn't the perfect outcome, but it was progress. Officer Grant had been held accountable, and Zeus was coming home. The following day, Ava arrived at the police station, her heart racing with anticipation. She had been through so much over the past week: fear, humiliation, and doubt. But now, there was a glimmer of hope. When the officer brought Zeus back to her, Ava could barely contain her emotions. Her hands trembled as she reached out to hold him, feeling the warmth of his feathers against her skin. Zeus chirped happily, settling onto her shoulder as if nothing had happened. "I'm so sorry, Zeus," Ava whispered, holding him close. "I'll never let anyone take you away from me again." As she walked out of the station, her steps felt lighter. The fight wasn't over. She knew that. There was still so much work to be done, and the world still had a long way to go when it came to understanding people like her. But Ava had learned something over the past week. She wasn't just a victim, she was a fighter. And she would continue fighting, not just for herself, but for everyone who needed a voice. Ava knew her journey had only just begun, but now she felt ready. With Zeus by her side, she would face whatever came next. Ava's story was only one of many. The fight for equality, for justice, and for dignity was ongoing, and it would take more than just one person to change the system. But Ava had taken her first steps, and she was ready to walk the long road ahead, one step at a time. Let's take a quick pause here. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from? Have you ever faced a similar experience or dealt with moments where you felt overlooked or misunderstood? Please share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Your stories are important, and we really appreciate each and every one of you. If you're enjoying this journey, don't forget to subscribe and stay updated with our future stories. Now, let's continue. The following days were filled with a mixture of emotions for Ava. The anger, sadness, and frustration she had been holding inside ever since Officer Grant took Zeus from her began to evolve into something else: determination. She had tried, with all her heart, to keep the situation from overwhelming her, but now it was no longer just about getting Zeus back. It was about something bigger. Ava realized that her fight wasn't just about her and Zeus. It was about standing up for her rights, for her dignity, and for all those who had been wronged or made to feel invisible by the system. It started with small steps, talking to the advocacy groups, reaching out to others who had experienced similar situations. But soon, those small steps began to build up into something more. Ava wasn't just a girl who had lost her parrot anymore. She was a voice for those who had been overlooked, for people who had been treated unfairly and dismissed. But as she began to gain traction, she also realized how difficult this fight would be. The more people she spoke to, the more she understood that what she was facing wasn't an isolated incident. There were countless others who had been victims of systemic mistreatment, disregarded because of their race, their disability, or their circumstances. Ava wasn't just fighting one officer anymore. She was fighting a system that had been built to ignore people like her, to push them aside, and to silence their voices. One afternoon, Ava sat down with Julia in the small coffee shop near her house. They had met there before, their usual spot to unwind, but today the conversation was different. Today, Ava wasn't just talking about her situation. She was strategizing. "I don't know what to do next," Ava said, her hands trembling as she stirred her coffee absent-mindedly. "I've contacted everyone I can think of, but nothing is changing. They keep pushing me aside like I don't matter." Julia leaned forward, her voice full of determination. "You matter, Ava. Your story matters. People are starting to listen to you. You've already made a huge impact." Ava shook her head. "It doesn't feel like it. It feels like I'm screaming into the void, and no one is hearing me." "I hear you," Julia said softly. "And I know that your voice is going to make a difference. You're not alone in this fight. The world doesn't want to listen, but you're going to make them." Ava paused, letting Julia's words sink in. She realized that this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had been dismissed, overlooked, or silenced because they were seen as less. Ava's story wasn't just her own. It was the story of so many others, and if she stayed silent, nothing would change. The next day, Ava went to the police station again. This time, she wasn't going to be pushed aside. She had a plan, and she was determined to follow through. She knew that getting Zeus back wasn't going to be easy, but she had to try. When she arrived, the officer behind the desk recognized her immediately. She could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes, but he didn't seem surprised. He'd probably seen more cases like hers. People who felt like they didn't have the strength or the voice to fight back. "I'm here for an update on my case," Ava said, her voice steady and unwavering. "I want to know what's happening with Zeus." The officer sighed, as if he was already tired of dealing with her. "We've already told you." "I know what you told me," Ava cut him off, her voice gaining strength. "I've been patient. I've called. I've emailed. But now I need action. I need to know where Zeus is and when I can get him back." The officer's eyes narrowed. "You need to understand. There's a process. It's not as simple as you think." "I don't care about your process," Ava said, her frustration mounting. "You took something from me, and I'm not going to stop until I get it back." Ava felt the weight of her words as they left her mouth. She had always been someone who kept to herself, who avoided confrontation. But now, something inside her had shifted. She wasn't the shy girl anymore, the one who let others walk all over her. She was standing up, and she wasn't going to back down. Over the next few days, Ava continued to push for answers. She contacted local news stations, spoke with disability rights groups, and made sure that her story was heard. The pressure was building, and soon, the story of her fight for Zeus began to spread. People were talking about it on social media, in local community groups, and at the school. Ava's name was becoming known, and so was her story. Then, late one evening, she received an unexpected call. It was the same officer who had been dismissive at the station. This time his tone was different. He sounded almost apologetic. "Ava," he began, "I've been instructed to return Zeus to you. We've looked into the situation further, and it's clear that the way things were handled was not right. I'm sorry for the way you were treated." Ava couldn't believe what she was hearing. After everything, after the countless phone calls, the endless emails, and the frustration, the officer was finally admitting that they had been wrong. "I'll be there tomorrow to pick him up," Ava said, her voice steady. But inside, she was overjoyed. The tears welled up in her eyes as the realization hit her. She had done it. She had fought for what was right, and now she was getting her parrot back. The next day, Ava stood in the police station, waiting as the officer brought Zeus out. When she saw her parrot, her heart soared. He was just as she remembered, his bright feathers vibrant and full of life, his eyes gleaming with recognition as he perched on her arm. Zeus chirped loudly, and Ava laughed through her tears. "Thank you," she whispered to the officer, her voice full of gratitude. The officer nodded. "You were right to stand up for yourself. I'm sorry it took this long." Ava left the station with Zeus by her side, feeling like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The fight wasn't over. There were still challenges ahead, still injustices to be faced. But for now, Ava had won. She had stood up for what was right, and in doing so, she had found her voice. As she walked home, Zeus perched happily on her shoulder. Ava felt a sense of peace. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been silenced, for everyone who had been treated like they didn't matter. And no matter what happened next, Ava knew one thing for sure. She was never going to stop fighting. Ava's journey was far from over, but she had learned something valuable. When you find your voice, you find your strength. And with that strength, there was nothing the world could throw at her that she couldn't face. The days after getting Zeus back were a whirlwind of emotions for Ava. While she felt immense relief and joy that her parrot was finally back with her, she also couldn't shake the sense of injustice that lingered. The experience with Officer Grant and the way the system had tried to dismiss her and her rights had left deep scars. Still, she refused to let it define her. Ava had spent her whole life trying to stay quiet, trying to avoid confrontation. But now she understood that staying silent only allowed the injustice to grow. The world had tried to take away her sense of belonging, to make her feel like she didn't matter, but Ava knew better now. She wasn't just going to roll over and let people trample on her anymore. She had learned the hard way that her voice was powerful and that standing up for herself was the only way forward. With Zeus back by her side, Ava felt stronger. She felt like she could breathe again, but there was still so much more to do. The pain of being ignored, the humiliation she had endured, all the moments she had been brushed aside just because of who she was. It weighed on her every single day. It wasn't just the loss of Zeus that hurt. It was the feeling of being small, of being invisible. She was a black disabled girl, and in so many ways, the world had made it clear that she didn't matter. But now, with her parrot on her shoulder and her heart filled with determination, she knew it was time for things to change. She couldn't change the way the world worked, but she could make sure that her voice was heard. She could make sure that the world knew she was here and that she mattered. Ava spent the next few weeks reflecting on everything that had happened, on how far she had come. She had always believed that she didn't have a voice, that people like her were always going to be dismissed. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized how many others were in the same situation. People who had been told their worth was nothing. People who had been ignored for far too long. And she couldn't let that continue. She couldn't let other people feel the same hurt she had felt. So, she began speaking out more. She started telling her story at local events, at community gatherings, and over social media. She shared the pain she had gone through, but also the hope she had found along the way. She spoke about the impact that one person's actions could have on someone's life and how people like her deserve to be seen and heard. The more she shared her story, the more people reached out to her. Some of them were people she knew. Others were strangers who had faced similar struggles. It wasn't easy at first. There were moments when Ava felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on her. But the support she received made her realize that she wasn't alone. Slowly but surely, Ava found herself becoming an advocate not just for herself, but for others. The realization was both empowering and overwhelming. She was no longer the quiet girl in the background. She was a voice for the voiceless. Ava continued to reach out to local groups, making connections with people who were fighting similar battles. She learned about the struggles of others who had been mistreated because of their disabilities or their race. The more she learned, the more passionate she became about creating change. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but she was ready for it. The community around her was changing too. Her fight had sparked conversations in the town, and people who had been silent for so long were beginning to speak up as well. Ava's bravery was contagious. She had started something bigger than herself. But as Ava continued to fight for justice, she began to see the cracks in the system more clearly. There were moments when she felt like the world was pushing back against her, telling her to stop, telling her to accept things as they were. People who had once been supportive started pulling away, unable or unwilling to face the uncomfortable truths that Ava's story had brought to light. She had to keep pushing. She couldn't stop now, not when she had come so far. There was too much at stake, and she wasn't the only one who needed to be heard. Ava knew that what had happened to her was part of a larger issue, one that stretched beyond her town, beyond her life. It was about the systems that allowed people like Officer Grant to take what wasn't theirs, to treat people like Ava as if they didn't matter. It was about racism, ableism, and the way society ignored those who didn't fit the mold. Ava couldn't fix everything at once, but she was going to keep fighting. Her voice would not be silenced. As the weeks turned into months, Ava found a new strength within herself. She had gone through the fire, but now she was stronger for it. She had learned that sometimes standing up for yourself wasn't easy. It was messy, it was painful, but it was necessary. The victory wasn't just in getting Zeus back. It was in the transformation that had taken place within her. Ava had become someone who would never back down, someone who had learned to stand tall even in the face of overwhelming odds. She was no longer afraid of speaking up. She was no longer afraid of being herself. And with Zeus by her side, Ava knew she could face anything that came her way. The fight for justice wasn't over, but Ava was ready for it. The world would see her. The world would hear her. And no matter how difficult the journey, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going anywhere. Ava's story is just one of many. And though the road ahead is uncertain, one thing is clear. She is ready to keep fighting for herself, for Zeus, and for everyone who has been silenced or dismissed. She is ready for the next step in her journey, and she will not stop until justice is served. It had been several weeks since Ava had gotten Zeus back, but the journey was far from over. The initial euphoria of reuniting with her parrot had faded, and in its place, a steady resolve had settled in her heart. The system had wronged her, yes, but now she could see the broader picture. It wasn't just about getting Zeus back. It was about fighting for the rights of people like her. People who had been silenced, marginalized, and ignored for far too long. The work ahead of her was going to be long, tiring, and full of resistance, but Ava was prepared for it. She had already faced one of the hardest battles of her life. And though the scars from that experience would always remain, she had learned that fighting for what was right was worth the struggle. Over time, Ava became more involved in local community efforts. She reached out to disability rights groups, to advocacy organizations for marginalized communities, and even began speaking at public forums. The more she shared her story, the more people began to listen, and she realized that her fight wasn't just personal anymore. It was part of a larger movement. Ava was starting to see how much bigger the issue of systemic injustice was. She saw how other disabled individuals, people of color, and those living on the margins had been treated similarly, ignored, mistreated, and silenced. It was a harsh reality, but Ava was no longer afraid to confront it head-on. Still, as much as she was committed to the cause, there were days when the weight of everything became too much to bear. The constant strain, the constant fight for recognition, it wore her down. Even the simple act of standing up for herself sometimes felt like a monumental task. And then there was the loneliness. Despite all the support she had from her friends, like Julia, there were moments when Ava felt like she was in this battle alone. The world had not only tried to take Zeus from her, it had tried to take her sense of belonging, her sense of self, but slowly, through the hard work of speaking out, of advocating for herself and others, Ava began to find pieces of herself that she didn't even know existed. Every time she stood up, every time she shared her voice, she felt a little bit stronger. She was becoming more than just the quiet girl who had once let the world walk all over her. She was becoming a force to be reckoned with. The pressure she faced, however, wasn't just external. Ava found herself wrestling with internal doubts. The injustice she had faced, the way people had treated her and others in the same boat, left a deep imprint on her. There were days when she questioned whether she was doing the right thing. Would speaking up make a difference? Would people actually listen? Or would she continue to be ignored, to be silenced, like so many others? But every time Ava felt herself slipping, she would think back to that day in the police station, when she had stood up to the officer and refused to be dismissed. She remembered the way the officer had eventually backed down, how he had returned Zeus to her. That moment gave her hope. It showed her that her voice, even in the face of adversity, had power. Ava's story, once personal and contained, began to ripple outward. She started receiving messages from other people, some with similar stories, others just offering words of encouragement. There were others like her, people who felt powerless in the face of a system that seemed designed to keep them down. And there was a growing sense of solidarity. People began to stand with her, to lift her up. And Ava realized that this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about creating a community of people who refused to accept the status quo. It wasn't easy. There were moments when Ava felt like she couldn't keep going. She faced resistance not just from outside forces, but from within. The deep-seated fears, the doubts about whether her efforts would matter, they all came flooding back when she least expected it. But Ava found solace in the small victories. Every person who reached out to thank her, every conversation she had that seemed to open someone's eyes, was a step in the right direction. She was beginning to see the impact of her actions, and though it was just a small spark in the grand scheme of things, it was enough to keep her going. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about creating a future where no one had to go through what she had experienced. It was about a world where no one would be silenced, where no one would be told they didn't matter. The fight for change was long, and Ava knew that, but she wasn't afraid of it anymore. She wasn't afraid to stand up, to speak out, to challenge the world that had so often told her she wasn't enough. And as she stood in front of a room full of people at one of her public talks, she realized just how far she had come. Ava had always been the one in the back, the one who stayed quiet. But now, she was the one at the front of the room, sharing her story, giving others the courage to do the same. There was still so much work to do, and Ava knew that. The system wasn't going to change overnight. The prejudices, the biases, and the injustices wouldn't disappear with a single act. But Ava was no longer waiting for someone else to create the change. She had found her voice, and she would continue to use it. For Zeus, for herself, and for everyone who had been made to feel less than they were. Ava had started something bigger than herself. She was fighting not just for her parrot, but for the right to be seen, to be heard, and to matter in a world that too often overlooked those like her. As Ava left the podium after one of her talks, the applause still ringing in her ears, she realized one important truth. She was not alone in this fight. There were others, and together they could create the change the world needed. As the weeks turned into months, Ava found herself at the center of something bigger than she had ever imagined. What had started as a personal struggle to reclaim Zeus had transformed into a movement, one that was larger than her. It wasn't just about an emotional support animal anymore. It was about standing up for what was right and forcing the world to see people like her, not as invisible, but as valuable, deserving of respect and dignity. Her voice had started to resonate with more people than she could have ever anticipated. What surprised Ava most was how her story began to spread beyond her community, beyond her small circle of friends. News outlets picked up her story, sharing her journey across the state, and soon, people from other parts of the country were reaching out to her. Many had their own stories of mistreatment, of being silenced by those in power, of enduring microaggressions or blatant discrimination. Ava became a symbol, not of victimhood, but of resilience. At first, she felt overwhelmed by the attention. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight. Ava had always kept to herself, had always been the quiet, invisible girl who just wanted to get by. But now, everything had changed. She was no longer just Ava from the small town. She was Ava, the young woman who had stood up for her rights, the woman who had fought to be heard. The pressure to continue speaking out, to keep sharing her story, began to weigh heavily on her. There were days when she felt exhausted, when she just wanted to retreat into the quiet, familiar world she used to know. But each time she thought about giving up, she would remember the faces of those who had reached out to her, the people who thanked her for giving them hope. She knew she couldn't stop. People were watching, listening, and waiting for her to continue. She had become a voice for those who felt as powerless as she once had. She couldn't abandon them now. One of the things Ava found hardest to cope with was the way some people responded to her newfound platform. While many were supportive, there were still those who saw her as a threat, who questioned her motivations or accused her of seeking attention. At school, the whispers had faded, but they hadn't completely disappeared. The same students who once mocked her for her disability or race were now looking at her with a mix of jealousy, resentment, and fear. Ava could feel their eyes on her during lunch breaks, in the hallways. It wasn't as overt as it had been before, but it was there, lurking, quiet, and insidious. She had become a target of their disdain simply because she had chosen to speak out, simply because she had dared to demand more for herself. But Ava didn't let their cold stares get to her. She had spent years shrinking in the background, letting others dictate her worth. No longer. She had chosen her path, and she wasn't going to let anyone push her back into the shadows. She kept moving forward. As the weeks passed, Ava continued to advocate for her cause, working with local and national organizations that supported disabled individuals, people of color, and marginalized communities. She spoke at conferences, at schools, and on social media, using her voice to bring attention to the systemic issues that affected so many. She wasn't just fighting for her rights anymore. She was fighting for justice, for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. But the road to real change wasn't without its struggles. There were setbacks. There were moments when it felt like nothing was changing, when it felt like she was just shouting into an abyss, and the world wasn't listening. The system that had failed her once before didn't suddenly become more just. Ava knew that. She understood that real change would take time and patience. But every step she took, every conversation she had, every person she reached, was a step in the right direction. And when she felt like giving up, she looked to Zeus. Her parrot, the one constant in her life, sat on her shoulder as she made phone calls, attended meetings, and shared her story. He was her reminder that no matter how difficult the journey, she wasn't alone. In many ways, Zeus had become her symbol. The bird who had been taken from her and returned had become a part of her identity. Their bond had always been special, but now it was something more. It was a reminder that the things we hold dear, the things that give us strength, are worth fighting for. One evening, Ava received an unexpected call from an attorney representing the city. They wanted to discuss a settlement. The news left her stunned. She had never expected anything like this. The city was offering a financial settlement, but more importantly, they wanted to offer an apology, not just to her, but to others who had been mistreated in similar situations. Ava knew that this was only a small part of the bigger picture, that the systemic issues she had fought against couldn't be solved with money, but it was a start. It was a sign that her efforts were making an impact, that the world was beginning to listen. With the settlement, she was able to start funding the advocacy work she had always dreamed of, creating programs to help those who were still voiceless, to fight for equality and justice where it was needed most. Ava's journey had been hard, and it wasn't over. But with every victory, with every person who reached out to thank her, she knew she was moving closer to the change she had longed for. The fight for justice was ongoing, but Ava wasn't afraid anymore. She had learned that standing up, even when it's hard, even when it's uncomfortable, was the only way to make the world a better place. With Zeus by her side and her heart full of hope, Ava was ready for whatever came next. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, but now she had the strength to face them. The weeks after the settlement felt like a whirlwind. Ava's life had changed in ways she hadn't anticipated. The work she had begun, the cause she had taken up, had given her purpose, but it had also forced her to confront the limitations of her own strength. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for a cause that was bigger than her, fighting for people who had long been silenced, ignored, and dismissed by the system. The attention she had received from her public fight for justice had brought both positive change and challenges. More people reached out to her, sharing their own stories of discrimination, mistreatment, and loss. Ava had become a symbol of resilience for those who had felt powerless. But she had also become a target for those who resented the attention she had drawn to the deep-rooted issues within their community. At first, the support had been overwhelming. Messages flooded in from all over the country, from people thanking her for standing up, for giving them hope, and for showing them that they could make their voices heard too. She had never imagined she could be part of something this big, something that would change the way people viewed her and others who had been marginalized. But as the weeks passed, Ava began to feel the pressure. She was carrying the weight of a cause on her shoulders, and it wasn't always easy. The constant demands for her time, the media interviews, the public speaking engagements, it all added up. She had always been someone who stayed in the background, who tried to avoid the spotlight, but now it was unavoidable. The glare of it felt heavy, and there were moments when Ava longed for peace, for quiet, for a chance to simply breathe. She had spent years fighting just to be seen, to be treated with respect. But now, she realized that there was more to this fight. It wasn't just about her story. It was about the people she had met along the way, the ones who had shared their pain with her and trusted her to speak on their behalf. She couldn't stop now. She wouldn't stop. Still, there were moments when the journey felt too heavy to bear, when the public's expectations weighed her down, when the struggles seemed endless. She found herself looking for solace in the small moments, the moments with Zeus sitting on her shoulder as she went about her day, always there, always a reminder of the strength it took to get to this point. Zeus had become more than just a parrot. He was a symbol of her resilience, a reminder of what she had fought for and why it mattered. One evening, after a long day of interviews and meetings, Ava sat on the porch of her house, watching the sunset. She was tired, emotionally drained, but there was a sense of peace in the stillness around her. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to relax, to think about the journey ahead. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that it wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about reaching some idealistic end. It was about the small steps, the small victories, and the moments when people started to understand each other, when change started to happen, even in the smallest ways. As she sat there, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Julia, her best friend, the one who had been there for her from the very beginning. Julia. Hey, just wanted to remind you how amazing you are. You've come so far. Don't forget to take care of yourself too. We've got this. Ava smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. Julia had always been the voice of reason, the one who had stood by her through every twist and turn of her journey. Ava. Thank you, Julia. I don't think I'd be here without you. It's been hard, but I'm starting to believe we can make a real difference. The message made her feel grounded. It reminded her of why she had started this fight in the first place. She wasn't alone. She had a community, and together they could create change. The next day, Ava attended a community rally. It wasn't the first one she had participated in, but today felt different. There was a new energy in the air, a sense of solidarity that hadn't been there before. People were speaking up, not just for Ava, but for each other. The rally was about more than just one person's fight. It was about creating a space where everyone could be heard, where everyone could stand together and demand justice. As Ava walked through the crowd, she was approached by people who recognized her, who thanked her for her bravery and for speaking out. Each interaction left a mark on her, reinforcing her belief that this fight was worth it. The more she spoke with people, the more she realized how many others had stories of their own. Stories of suffering, but also stories of survival, of hope, and of change. That day, Ava spoke at the rally. She wasn't prepared for the size of the crowd, but when she stood at the microphone, she felt something click. This wasn't about her. It was about the community. It was about showing up for each other, standing side by side, and making sure that everyone knew they were valued. Her speech was simple but powerful. She talked about the importance of standing up, of not letting the world tell you that you don't matter. She spoke about the strength she had found, the power of speaking out, and the need for everyone to be seen and heard. When she finished, the crowd erupted in applause, and for the first time in a long while, Ava didn't feel alone. She didn't feel like just one person fighting a losing battle. She felt part of something bigger. After the rally, Ava's confidence grew. She was starting to realize that even though the road to real change was long, the movement was already happening. People were coming together, speaking out, and pushing back against the injustices that had long been ignored. Ava knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, there would be obstacles, and there would be moments when it felt like the world wasn't listening. But she was no longer afraid. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had been overlooked, for everyone who had been silenced, for everyone who had been told they didn't matter. With each step she took, Ava felt her strength growing, and the more she learned, the more she realized that this fight wasn't just hers to win, it was all of theirs. And together, they would keep pushing for a world where no one would ever be told that they didn't belong. The days following the rally were filled with a sense of cautious optimism for Ava. The overwhelming response from the community had given her new hope, and while the road ahead was still uncertain, she felt a deep sense of purpose growing inside her. She had become more than just the girl who had fought for her parrot. She had become a voice for those who were still struggling in silence, for those whose pain had long been ignored. But Ava was also beginning to feel the pressure of her newfound responsibility. The weight of the fight, the need to be an example for others, began to take a toll on her. She had never intended to become a figurehead, a symbol for so many, but that's exactly what had happened. She now felt like she had to be perfect, like every word she said, every action she took, was being scrutinized. It was exhausting. One evening, as she sat at her desk, staring at the screen of her laptop, she could feel the exhaustion creeping in. The media requests were constant. The messages from people thanking her for her work, sharing their own stories of discrimination and suffering, never seemed to stop. Every time she thought she could take a breath, there was another request, another demand on her time. She had been working day and night, organizing events, attending meetings, speaking to reporters, and yet it never felt like enough. There were still so many people who needed help, so many who hadn't been reached yet. The pressure to do more, to be more, was suffocating. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Julia, her rock throughout all of this, and Ava couldn't help but smile. Julia had been there from the very beginning, encouraging her when Ava had felt like giving up, reminding her of the importance of the work they were doing. Ava clicked on the message. Julia, I'm so proud of you, Ava. You've come so far, but you need to take care of yourself too. You can't keep running on empty. Ava sighed and leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of Julia's words. She knew Julia was right. Ava had been pushing herself harder than she had ever pushed anyone else, forgetting to take a moment for herself, to recharge. But it was hard. It felt like there was always more to do, more people to help, more change to make. How could she stop when so much was still wrong with the world? But Julia was insistent. Ava, I know you want to change everything overnight, but you can't do it if you're burnt out. Take a break, even if it's just a day. Ava thought about it for a long moment. Could she really afford to stop? Was it selfish to take a break when so many people were counting on her? But the answer came to her in a quiet moment of clarity. She wasn't going to be able to keep going if she didn't take care of herself first. Ava had always tried to put others first, but she had to realize that in order to make the difference she wanted to see, she had to be strong, not just for others, but for herself too. She set the phone down and decided that she would take the next day off. Just one day to clear her head, to step away from the weight of the world and to reconnect with herself. She knew it was necessary. She needed to rest, to find the peace that had been slipping away from her for so long. The next day, Ava spent the entire morning in her room, just sitting in silence, listening to the sounds around her, the soft chirp of birds outside her window, the rustling of the trees in the wind. Zeus sat on his perch, occasionally calling out in his playful way, as if trying to get her attention. Ava smiled, the familiar comfort of his presence helping her feel more grounded. She hadn't realized how much she missed these quiet moments, these moments of calm, where she could simply exist without the weight of the world pressing on her. Later, she went for a walk in the park. It was a small park near her house, one she had visited countless times as a child, but today it felt different. The air was crisp and refreshing, the sun filtering through the trees. Ava walked slowly, allowing herself to soak in the stillness around her. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she could breathe. As she walked, she thought about everything that had happened. The rally, the media coverage, the support from so many people. It had been overwhelming, but it had also been empowering. Ava had learned so much about herself in the past few months. She had learned that she was stronger than she had ever given herself credit for. She had found a courage that she didn't know she had, and with it, she had begun to make a real difference in the world. But the world was still changing, still growing, and there was so much more to be done. Ava knew that. She couldn't change the world overnight, but every step she took, every person she reached, was a step in the right direction. The journey ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but Ava had learned one important lesson. The fight for justice wasn't just about the destination, it was about the journey itself. And on that journey, she wasn't alone. When Ava returned home, she felt lighter, as if the weight of the world had lifted, even if just for a moment. She wasn't going to stop fighting for change. She wasn't going to stop fighting for herself, for Zeus, and for everyone who had been silenced. But she knew now that she could only do so much. The world didn't need her to be perfect. It just needed her to keep going, to keep speaking up, and to keep making her voice heard. And she would. The following week, Ava stood at another rally, this time in front of a much larger crowd. The media coverage was even more widespread, and people had come from all over to hear her speak. But this time, when she stood at the podium, she didn't feel overwhelmed. Instead, she felt a calm confidence that she hadn't felt before. She had learned that she could balance her passion with self-care. She could give her all to this fight, but she didn't have to give everything of herself. Ava began speaking, her words steady and full of conviction. This fight, this journey, it's not just mine, it's ours. We are all in this together, and together we will create the change that is so desperately needed. The crowd erupted in applause, and Ava felt a deep sense of peace in that moment. She was part of something bigger, something important. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for a future where everyone could be heard, where no one would be silenced, where justice would prevail. And as the applause washed over her, Ava knew that no matter how hard the road ahead might be, she was ready. She wasn't giving up. Not now, not ever. She had found her strength, her purpose, and with Zeus by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. The months had passed in a blur for Ava, each day feeling like a step forward, though sometimes it felt like 2 steps back. The rallies, the speeches, the endless messages of support and criticism alike, everything had been overwhelming. Yet, through it all, Ava had kept her focus, her determination never faltering. She was no longer the quiet girl who let others decide her worth. She was the girl who fought for what was right, for justice, for her place in this world. Her life had shifted in ways she hadn't fully realized until now. The journey that began with the loss of Zeus had sparked something much bigger than she could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had felt like their voice didn't matter, every person who had been silenced because of their race, their disability, or their station in life. Ava had become a leader, an advocate for change, and although the fight was far from over, she knew that her voice had made an impact. Today, she stood in front of a crowd once again, this time at a community centre, where a new initiative was being launched. It wasn't just another rally, it was a movement, one that she had helped to shape. The initiative was about advocating for marginalised communities, ensuring that disabled people, people of colour, and those who faced prejudice on a daily basis would no longer be ignored. It was a platform for individuals who had been treated like they didn't belong, a chance for them to stand up and be seen. As Ava walked onto the stage, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. The girl who once avoided conflict, who shrank back when things got too loud, was now standing here as a beacon of hope for so many. But the reality of what she had accomplished, of what she had started, didn't escape her. The journey was still in its early stages, and the road ahead would be long. But Ava knew this wasn't just about creating change in her own life. It was about creating a legacy. This was about laying the groundwork for future generations to stand tall and proud, without fear of being pushed aside. As she took the microphone in hand, the crowd grew quiet, waiting for her words. She could feel the weight of it all. But this time, she was no longer afraid. This time, she was ready. "This isn't just my fight," Ava began, her voice steady and strong. "It's the fight of every person who has ever felt like they didn't matter. It's the fight of every person who has been told that their voice doesn't count, that they're invisible. It's our fight, and together, we are going to change the world." She paused, letting the words sink in. "When I started this journey, I had no idea how far it would take me. I had no idea that standing up for myself would lead me to standing up for so many others. But now, I see that we are stronger together. We are not alone. And together, we can move mountains." The crowd erupted into applause, and Ava felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She had come full circle. She had started this journey by fighting for Zeus. But now, she was fighting for the future, for a world that would be more compassionate, more understanding, and more just. The applause continued. And as she looked out at the sea of faces before her, Ava realized that the change she had dreamed of was already beginning. It wasn't just a dream anymore. It was becoming a reality. Later that evening, after the event had ended, Ava sat on her porch, watching the sky darken as the last rays of the sun faded into the horizon. Zeus was perched on her shoulder, his soft feathers brushing against her cheek as he squawked contentedly. Ava smiled, taking a deep breath, and for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. The weight of the world still loomed over her, but she no longer carried it alone. She had found strength, not just within herself, but in the people who stood by her, the people who had shared their stories, their struggles, and their hopes for a better future. Ava knew the fight wasn't over. She knew there would be more obstacles ahead, more battles to fight, more moments when it would feel like everything was falling apart. But she also knew that she was ready for whatever came next. She wasn't afraid anymore. And as she looked at Zeus, who had been there for her through it all, she realized just how far they had come. From the day he had been taken from her, to the day she stood up to Officer Grant, to this moment now, Ava had grown in ways she never imagined. She wasn't just a girl fighting for her rights anymore. She was a leader, a voice, and a force for change. And with that, Ava made a promise to herself. She would never stop. She would keep fighting, keep speaking out, and keep making sure that the voices of those who had been silenced were heard. In the years to come, Ava would continue to advocate for justice, for equality, and for the rights of those who had been pushed aside. Her work would take her to new places, new challenges, but the core of her mission would always remain the same: to ensure that no one, no matter their race, their ability, or their background, would ever have to feel invisible again. She had started with a single, simple act of defiance, but now her voice was a powerful tool for change. And with Zeus by her side, she would never stop fighting, for herself and for everyone who needed a voice in a world that sometimes seemed too eager to overlook them. Ava had learned that the road to justice was long, but every step, every word, every action was worth it. Because in the end, it wasn't just about the battles won or lost. It was about the lives changed, the stories told, and the legacy left behind. Ava's fight was far from over, but now she knew she had the strength to keep going, and the world was starting to listen. Thank you for following Ava's journey. We would love to hear what you think about this story. Have you ever experienced moments of racism or discrimination in your own life? Your thoughts are incredibly important to us, and we truly appreciate every one of you. Please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. It really helps us grow and reach more people. Before you go, we'd like to ask you to write the phrase, "I stand for change," in the comments to let us know you listened to the entire story. We value each and every one of you, and we thank you for being part of this journey. Have a wonderful day ahead.